Alrighty, Ryan Boyle, we are so excited to have you on Tide Talks today. I'm inspired by your career and where you've come from, your humble beginnings, and how you've kind of gone left, down, right, up, and center, and found your way into the intersection of the nonprofit sector and technology and what that's meant and the impact and the ripple effect that you've been able to create in your career. We're first going to start though with a fun question around a music related thing. You and I both resonate around music. We send each other music, I think, every other day or every day as it is. And I did not prep you for this question, so I want to ask you this. If you had to boil it down to one singular Grateful Dead song that you could only listen to for the rest of your life, what would that song be?
That is a tough one that is constantly evolving. But I definitely think Help is on the way. Slipknot is probably the song that I will listen to the most. And, it was Althea for many, many years. And I may end up going back to that because it's such a fantastic song. But, with the Grateful Dead, you can listen to a million versions of a song and they're always going to be different and interesting and compelling, especially if you get into the live stuff. But I think just the complexity of the guitar playing, and the way in which it's been handled by John Mayer and by Jerry Garcia and just those folks that have tried to put their spin on that song is really interesting and always gets me going. So I could
All
geek
right.
out.
If that doesn't tell you a little bit about our guest today, that's a little bit about, and we'll be getting much deeper than that. Althea is mine for now. I continue to listen to it on a regular basis. Thank you for the introduction to it. Look, I'm so excited to have you on today, Ryan. Like I talked about in the beginning, I think many of us have kind of gone in different routes to being where we are today in our careers. And I think one of the points of Tide Talks is always to think about how do we use our lived experience and share that with the youth so that they are armed with that information. And hopefully that'll help them with greater outcomes than they could have without it. And I think one of the things that I get really concerned about is thinking about how the number one career that the youth want to be right now, and this is just from polls and things out there, so take it with a grain of salt, but that most of the youth want to be an influencer. And I think an influencer to me is somebody who typically has gone through years of experience and grinds and all the challenges to reach a certain point to be able to have that. And so I think it's important to interview people like yourself and other really incredible human beings so that we can uncover what your progression has been, both on the personal and career side. And again, to hopefully inspire and give some of our knowledge and our experience to the youth. So I first want to start with, let's talk about where you first got into the nonprofit sector. I think that's such a big part of who you are today, but I don't know if everyone really knows how you first got introduced into the space.
Yeah. It's a great story. I was in eighth grade. It didn't start off as a great day. It was the day of the 1989 earthquake. And believe it or not, I was on my paper route before there were influencers. There were newspapers that were actual paper that had to be delivered on a bicycle. So I was on my paper route trying to go as fast as I can because the San Francisco Giants were playing the Oakland A's in the World Series and everybody in the Bay Area was trying to get home to watch that game. And then the earthquake hit and, I got home, my dad got home. And once the dust settled, no pun intended, he drove me up to the Red Cross and said, go help. And I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know, who to talk to. But they brought me in and gave me a broom and said, start sweeping. And, I got my first exposure into like helping an organization that was helping others. And they brought me in with open arms. That started a career both as a volunteer and as an employee with the Red Cross in the Bay Area nationally that spanned almost 15 years on and off, and that led me to you know understand the value of giving back. And my dad always thought that that was just such a huge priority to make yourself a well-rounded individual. Was like your life is not just about yourself; it's about what you can do to make the world a better place and how you treat your fellow humans.
Yeah, when I hear that story, I think about what an incredible decision in that moment for your father to think, amongst this chaos, I'm going to get my son and drop him off and have him do something to at least help, even in whatever capacity that may be. Even if you, Ryan, didn't know what it was going to be on that day. I just think that's such a commendable trait and something that I wanted to call out as a really cool thing. And look, I think in the theme of what we're talking about today, I think a lot of times people view career progression as like just something that happens automatically and it's a smooth ride to the top and then suddenly you're an executive. And I think that even starts with thinking about how schooling works with the youth today. And what I'm particularly interested in hearing about is you've taken a non-traditional route to get to where you are. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure, yeah. You know, when I was growing up, I thought I was going to be a teacher, even when I was, when I was a young child in elementary and middle school. But when I got to the end of high school, I didn't have the most amazing grades. I think I graduated my high school to 2.8. And don't tell my kids that. And, um, when I went to college, I was focused on other things. I wasn't quite ready to fully participate academically in college the way that was required. I was really into music and making music with my friends and being in a band. So that distracted me and inevitably took me in a direction where I didn't think I was going to go to college, and ended up going into EMT school. And I did go through the fire academy as well. I was thinking about being a firefighter at the community college, and then ended up becoming an EMT, and then eventually a paramedic in San Jose in my early 20s, when most people were like at dorms and frat parties and all that. I was at car accidents at 3 o'clock in the morning. And did that for a little bit, and then realized that if I didn't complete my education, my college education, that I was going to really limit myself in terms of like what my career options would be. So at the age of 24, that's when I decided to go back to college. And I think when I applied at my college, I applied with a 1.9 college GPA. And so they admitted me on probation, and I had to get a 3.5 in my first semester. And, I had not a great track record, but I was older and more mature and had life lessons, and went back and, ended up getting, doing quite well, a 3.9 through the rest of my college tenure. It would have been a 4.0, but I got a B in yoga. That's a story for another day. But while I was there, I got involved with student affairs, and managing the dorms and housing, which led me into a career in higher ed, and in particular, a couple of CSUs were part of that career experience. Cal State Monterey Bay, where I got very involved with a population that they were focused on serving, which was first time college students from immigrant families that were mostly coming out of Central California, working on the farms, et cetera. And really started to like step outside of my life and my life experience, and understand what the challenges and opportunities were for a different different demographic that I didn't belong, that I did not come from. And then inevitably went up to Cal State East Bay, which was in Hayward, served kind of the Oakland, Richmond, East Bay, Northern California population. And it was there that I got very involved in those communities, and understanding like most of the college students that lived on campus at Cal State East Bay were local, not coming out from external areas, but trying to get out of tough neighborhoods, and challenging environments so that they could get their college education. And that got me really involved with social justice, which led me to my career at Goodwill and inevitably to Salesforce. Long answer.
Few things, yeah, a few things to unpack here. Um, one of the things that I took away from that journey is there was a lot of change, right? There's a lot of change. There's a lot of venturing into the unknown. Could you help us understand like your mindset? Were you a person who just like said, I'm just going to jump into the deep end and hope it goes well, or help us understand how you were able to come to those moments of significant change or pivots? And how did you look at that from a mindset perspective?
Yeah, I think when you're growing up, and there's a certain narrative that is out there. I don't know, necessarily where it came from. I think it might be kind of an old school thinking of, you got to know what you want to do, you got to study for it, you got to go for it, and that's going to be your career. And what I realized was that the college experience in and of itself took me in a variety of different directions. I think I changed my major 4 times. I think it was business and political science, and I ended up getting social science with a minor in creative writing. But just understanding that, I wasn't locked into a necessarily a specific career, and for those, for the role that I found myself in, it was all out of, kind of the financial scenario that I found myself in, which was, I grew up in a poor family that had no ability to really support me financially in any kind of way from the moment I was, a youth up until college. And, um, you know, being a resident advisor allowed me to live on campus and get my housing paid for. But it got me into this role of giving back. I think I fell into that role out of kind of financial need. But what it taught me was that there's this whole part of a university called student affairs. I didn't really understand what it was or what the career paths were. I kind of fell into it, fell into it. And I think from there, I was just open to the journey. I wasn't locked into a career path that was, super well defined. And quite honestly, if you would have asked me back then if I'd be in this job working with you, I would have like told you were crazy. I think part of it's just being open to learning and open to the fact that, a career path is not just about what you technically want to do, but the networks that you build, the relationships that you establish. Certainly, career experience is a wonderful thing, but they're being able to communicate your transferable skills, and then where does your intellectual curiosity take you over time? Because it doesn't just stop once you get your job, right? You think, oh, I go to college, I do this, and then I'm in my job. I'm 50 and I'm still trying to figure out, ways in which I can continue to grow and learn. So that path never stops.
I think it's so important that people hear that it's okay to not know right now. But I think a couple of things you talked about curiosity, developing transferable skills, and knowing how to transfer those. I think those maybe sound like a couple of skills or things that you added to to the tool belt along the way that helped you overcome those adversities, would you say?
Absolutely. And I think the one, the biggest, most challenging time where I had to pull on those skills was when I was making the move from nonprofit sector to nonprofit technology. And being able to look at my resume and look at my LinkedIn profile that was very much purpose built for being a nonprofit executive. And then being able to repurpose my skill set and translate it into technology role type of language. And then also being able to kind of apply that thinking to the conversations that I was having so that I could start to create opportunities for myself to be able to move from the nonprofit sector to the tech sector. That was, kind of a 2-year journey, really, to get into real conversations about being able to make a move. So,
One thing you said there, I'm curious if you don't mind elaborating, which is working it into conversations around you. That's something that I think I've never heard someone talk about on the podcast, and maybe you could talk about what that means more, because I think there's like a ripple effect that you and I both believe in, and I think if it becomes part of a conversation, what you're trying to do, you can unlock relationships you didn't even know available. So maybe talk a little bit more about that.
yeah, I just think, understanding who's in your network and who you can bring into your network and putting value on that, right? Understanding that it's worthwhile to seek out mentors. It's worthwhile to seek out conversations. It's worthwhile to be vulnerable, right? I think that's a really important aspect to this. And then also to take credit for knowledge that you attain. I think one of the things that I always want to encourage young folks is, you don't want to be overconfident based off of nothing, but you don't want to be so insecure that you're unwilling to advocate for yourself, right?
Right.
And I think it's important to Acknowledge when you've built some knowledge, and when you've built a relationship, that is an achievement that you should be proud of and that you can build on top of, and to be proud of the knowledge that you've had and to share it, right? And I think that's a little bit of social battery and where you are on kind of your Myers-Briggs and all of those kinds of things, but so keenly important for people to be able to get a chance to understand who you are and what your capabilities are, because it's usually these kinds of interactions that drum up conversations that lead into opportunities, whether that be a volunteer opportunity or a networking opportunity, an educational opportunity, or a job opportunity.
Mm, so well said. And you talked about something there that I'm a big proponent of, and we talk about a lot on Tide Talks, which is the value of mentors. And I think for the youth, it's so important to surround yourself with a few mentors that you feel trusted, that you can have open conversations with. Maybe you could share how you got your first mentor or what that person was like for you and what impact they created.
Sure. Yeah. I could talk about a few. There are many. But the one that just popped in my head first, um, it's a guy named John Draper. And he was a teacher and a principal or a vice principal, at a school in Hillsboro, Crystal Springs Upland School. And when I was working for the Red Cross, I had a job for a couple of years in youth services where I was teaching young adults and young children about all kinds of health and safety things. It could be choke safety or water safety. I even taught babysitting class, like, so teaching people how to change cloth diapers. Talk about humbling. Um, but while that I was doing that, sometimes I would get hired to go to a school and teach a class. And I've always been a little eccentric and not shy in front of an audience. That's something I've always just part of my personality. And but never never thought it would turn into much. But I really enjoyed teaching and was always authentically myself. And John grabbed me after I was teaching a class at Crystal Springs Upland School and said, "Boy, you're doing a really great job with this. Would you consider turning this into a summer school course and coming to work for me in the summer?" And to be honest with you, I had always had that dream of being a teacher, but I was pretty far away from it. But here was this opportunity that was given to me by somebody that saw something in me, and it turned into a decade long relationship, where I got to teach, starting with health and safety. But as I continued my college education, he brought me back, and I was able to teach math and English classes and chess, and really got to kind of fulfill that vocational dream. And it was just because he was looking out for me. He saw an opportunity, he brought me in, and then he guided and mentored me, and he stayed as a mentor through most of my young career. And I'm very, very grateful for John.
That's such a wonderful story, and I think, again, I just think getting mentors is such a valuable thing for the youth right now. I mean, they'll share their experience. They'll be an unbiased person who only cares about your success and your growth. And I think you just can never truly quantify what they're able to do in your life. And so, again, if I'm the youth today, I think I'm looking at family, friends for potential first entry points to mentors, people in your first job, and finding people who you think might have a career trajectory that's similar to yours. And I think this is a call to action if you're listening to Ryan's story here is go create that connection. Be curious, as Ryan talked about, be open to what they can share. And then you never know what doors that they may open. So I know that you're a big proponent for mentors as well. And so I just want to
Absolutely.
double down. It's so important. But a big piece, you said this earlier, and I'd like for you to just expand on it. A piece that comes with getting a mentor and starting to open up the opportunities in front of you is you have to advocate for yourself. And I would love to hear your thoughts on advocating for yourself and how you've kind of developed that muscle over the years.
Yeah, I think, when you think about things you want to achieve in life, oftentimes, especially when you're young, they just seem so far away and so unachievable, whether that's getting your bachelor's degree or buying your first house. Um, and I think the key is that, you know, you're not going to have all the answers, right? Especially when you're young, right? You want to have them all. And I think I'm a Gen Xer. We certainly had some immediate gratification inserted into our, media consumption. But I think it's only gotten more intense over time when we think about social media and things of that nature. But, life goals are not, achieved overnight. It's a path, it's a journey that you need to put yourself on, and then setting reasonable expectations for yourself around what it's going to take, and that you might change and evolve and grow. But I think, understanding where to get started is oftentimes just being vulnerable and raising your hand, right? Whether that's signing up for that community college class or volunteering or going to a networking event, or you've met someone that has inspired you and you want to engage with them because you think you can learn from them. Like, don't think about it. Reach out and ask. Start the conversation. Oftentimes that's the only thing that's needed to get that connection and that relationship going. So that's what I would say to you is, don't wait for it to come to you. Raise your hand, make yourself vulnerable, and go ask for it. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to get folks that are going to want to help you. Um, and then I think the other thing that I would say too is, just be humble, right? You're going to be wrong and you're going to make mistakes over and over and over again. And that's okay. You learn more from your mistakes than from your victories, right? So just, as long as you can accept that and not let your ego get in the way, you'll create velocity on that growth.
So well said, Ryan. And there, you just vulnerable. Being vulnerable, I think, is a skill that you just continuously have to develop because it's so anti against the ego at times, right? To show that level of vulnerability and to be potentially hurt. But I think it is you see a common theme in high performers or people who are achieving their dreams. Is you got to be open to being vulnerable and learning and growing along the way, and then leading with action and making things happen. Don't think, just go, and you never know what the universe can open up for you. And so I hope the folks listening in can kind of see this story where Ryan gets dropped off, to help a nonprofit, finds his way, and there's a lot of areas, a lot of times on that journey, Ryan, where a normal person could feel stuck. They could feel like, how do I make the next move, or just kind of stay where they are instead of continuously moving forward. So I think your story is so inspiring to me as somebody who continues to be able to navigate through, the uncertainty or the unknown. And then I want to transition the topic to talk about, you know, a big moment in your career is getting a job opportunity with Salesforce during a very incredible time in Salesforce's history when they had the foundation and the .org side of the business. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that point in your career, because it really did change the trajectory of where you were going. And I think you got to be at this intersection again of nonprofit technology, but also seeing tangible impact. As you're not a person who just, can move technology and say goodbye. You really stick to clients and stay close to them and see the outcomes that you talk about when they first, get introduced, and say what's possible here. So maybe you could talk about the journey into getting into Salesforce as a big point in your career, how maybe you got there, because I think the story is quite fun to hear.
Sure. Yeah. When I was at Goodwill, I loved working there. It was deeply meaningful work, especially for somebody that was born and raised in San Francisco, Bay Area, and got exposed to social inequalities in my career at Cal State East Bay. Being able to go to Goodwill and directly intervene, and play a role in helping folks get out of poverty, is very humbling in and of itself. And the win rate's not super high, but you do get wins, and those wins really do matter when people can transform their lives through work, which that's all Goodwill's really about, right? At the core. It's not just where you get your, Halloween costume, which is a big misconception that a lot of folks have. But while I was there, I moved up the career chain and got into a leadership role, and found myself spending more time with Excel spreadsheets and Word documents than I was actually being on the floor working with folks. And it wasn't that the work wasn't important, because what I was doing was supporting our grants and our grant funding and our, external funders, including the city and county of San Francisco. Um, but the technology that we had was limited, and we didn't really invest in it that much because we're a nonprofit, and we weren't really thinking about what technology could do from us at that point. Salesforce was not new to San Francisco, but certainly its applicability as a technology to the nonprofit sector was just really starting to emerge. And, quite honestly, I was so focused on delivering programs and our program participants, I would be invited to board meetings and I would see all these fancy titles from all these tech companies and others that were on our board. And I thought it was, interesting. But I wasn't really focused on building that network. I was focused on more like help me do my job better. And I was very frustrated about the limitations of our technology and how much time it was taking me to create the reports. And at the time, Suzanne Debianca, who was the president of the Salesforce Foundation at the time, was on our board, and she said to me, um, "Why won't you think about using Salesforce for that?" And at the time, NPSV was this is like 2008, 2009, and NPSV was like pretty new and was not the super robust platform that it is today. And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And she said, Let me show you what we're trying to do." And at that time, the Salesforce Foundation office was in San Mateo, and they weren't even in San Francisco. I went down to their office, and Suzanne and her team showed me what they were building. And it was at that moment where a light bulb went off. One, that this amazing technology was emerging that was going to really transform the ways in which nonprofits could be able to use this technology to do so much more, and have such a bigger impact across the business, whether it was volunteering or fundraising or programs. But also for me, I was like, boy, if I could work for an organization like that, I could take my passion for what I have in working with nonprofits, and it would be a multiplier effect because I'd be able to work with all kinds of nonprofits. And so I decided at that moment that I wanted to work there. And, they were not really hiring nonprofit people at that time. They were mostly hiring folks from Oracle because they were kind of like, we need tech sales people that can sell product. So I, applied and nothing happened, and I applied and nothing happened, and I would email people on LinkedIn and I would get ignored, or left on red. That's what they say these days, right? Um, and then I think about 2 years into that journey where I just would not give up,
Mhm.
because I was going to figure it out one way or the other. I kept reading and editing my resume and changing the way in which I wrote paragraphs, and just trying to, what is the language? What is that one paragraph that's going to crack the door open?
Yeah.
And one day, Suzanne, messaged me back and she said, "Okay, I'm going to forward your resume." I don't know if it was because I said something magical or she was just like, I'm done with this guy, like get him off my plate. But later that morning, I got a phone call from a guy named Mark Ferris, who was at the time the manager for the sales team, and is now currently a High Tide board member. So full circle moment there. And we chatted, and he said, "I'm going to ask you a few questions. If I like it, we're going to move you on to the next round." And, that 2 weeks later, I had a job at Salesforce. And, I was in the middle of a world that I did not understand. And I was definitely a fish out of water. But I can say that I started with three other coworkers that all came from Oracle. And at the end of that 12 months, I was the only one that was left and succeeding. So my little science experiment worked out.
Man, it's such an incredible story. And I think it's one that's shaped by something that's so important to me, which is if you're going to work, especially from a consulting perspective in the sectors that we do, having industry experience is truly a differentiator, Ryan. And I think you coming from both having experience working in higher education and in the nonprofit space that had to have changed the way that you showed up and the way that you thought about your work on a day-to-day basis. It wasn't just, let me try to move as much, SKUs or, product that I can. It had to really shape and put your kind of, I felt it feels like the way you were talking it, work and your passion kind of met at a complete intersection where then you could affect real change, right? And I think that's what I took away from that story.
Absolutely. And I think also, um, I think nonprofits who are evaluating and trying to figure out how to invest in technology, it's not like they just have a bunch of, capital expenditure money or a budget, just a tech budget that's just burgeoning with funds for them to play around with tools. Especially then, it's like when I was at Goodwill, if we invested in technology, it was like we got to be good with this for 5 years, maybe 10, because it's not just the cost, but it's the time, and nobody has enough time. Everybody's wearing 5 to 10 hats in a nonprofit. So I just think having that perspective, being in that industry and understanding the use cases,
Yep.
understanding what case management actually means for a workforce development agency, or the interplay between securing a grant and reporting on it, or what it means to take $50,000 of your donor dollars and investing it in infrastructure. Oftentimes, when many of your funders are saying, you can only use 10% of these dollars towards administrative costs, right?
Hmm.
Which IT, that level of experience um, also carries a level of responsibility, right? And when you move into tech sales and you move into professional services, you know, I feel ultimately responsible for doing good work and telling the truth, and making sure that I keep my word and that I represent my firm. And I certainly, that's where you and I aligned, and why we're working together today is on that very, that's one of our core values that we share. But that to me was something that you just can't pick up, right? That internalizing what that actually means to be on that side of the table. So
As you were talking about that, it made me think what you've probably seen in your career from being at the Goodwill and what technologies were being used between that and higher education versus what some of the leading nonprofits are doing today. Maybe elaborate like what is that evolution or that cycle been like from like literally you doing manual paperwork versus what you see some of our and your clients doing today?
yeah, I mean, when I started, at Salesforce Foundation, like, I was 20 October of 2013. The footprint was pretty small, right? Not in the Bay Area. And I had San Francisco as my territory, and Salesforce is headquartered in San Francisco. So, like, even a Goodwill back then, they just gave us 250 licenses, like, gave it to us. They didn't tell us what to do with it, you know, but they gave it to us and it was awesome. But we were like, we just basically turned it into a giant Rolodex. But I think, I was there in those early days when everybody was just trying to figure out how to use a CRM and what it actually could replace. And could it manage fundraising and donor relationships? Sure, account and contact management, but actually manage donations, track donations, have engagement plans to engage, to manage grants and programs. Like, all of that functionality was built out while I was an employee at Salesforce, right? And so, it was an exciting time because it was a period of great transition for nonprofits, figuring out that they could take advantage of this technology and that they could explore a world in which their data was all connected, right? And that fundamentally would change the way a nonprofit would operate and collaborate, right? Even when I was at Goodwill, we worked in silos. We
Yeah.
all had our own reports. We all had our own, you know, little dashboards, and folks had silos that they protected. They didn't want to share that data. So, to be part of that conversation, to facilitate multitudes of change management conversations, and then ultimately see tremendous impact when folks fully adopted Salesforce over the last couple of years, was phenomenal for me to be part of. And to this day, I fully believe in the power of the technology to help organizations move the needle. But again, we're now, you know, in the midst of another tech evolution,
We are.
and it's really interesting to be part of that conversation.
Yeah, and you've got to be on the forefront of these conversations and really thinking about the art of what's possible and redefining how we've historically looked at data. But I think one of the things I want to make sure that we're always bringing it back to is, again, if I think about, for people dialing in and thinking about if they were to jump into a new career or pivot from an existing industry like you did coming from nonprofit and higher ed, then I'm going to get into tech sales. Again, what I heard you talk about in your experience and kind of how you view it is one of the things is you can go down a certain career path for a few years and you can take that transferable knowledge, which is how you show up, your vulnerability, how you work as a team, right? And what I heard you is you pulled a lot of that, and then you remembered industry experience. And when we say industry experience, that means Ryan was quite literally pen and paper, working at the Goodwill, documentation, doing different initiatives. And when you have that experience, even if you transition to a completely new career, that experience doesn't go away. In fact, it has helped you become who you are and
Mhm.
led you to be able to pivot into new careers and new ventures. And so, what I want to highlight in Ryan's story is again, he's working in higher education. He's working in the nonprofit space. There's a unique opportunity via networking and looking at the people around you, right? And you see these fancy, titles and you reach out to them. And that's how this career can evolve and flow and how it becomes connected, even though the vision or your day-to-day may change. Is that fair to say in terms of like what you would
Absolutely.
recommend to the youth?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also say, like, you may not always know at the time what the lesson is while you're in
Mm,
it, right?
yeah.
And you know, you sometimes when you're young, and if your path is clear and you got straight A's and you're going to the Ivy League, hey, great. But for a lot of folks, that's not the case. And you do things out of necessity or what the limited opportunity is at the moment. And sometimes you're like, I'm doing this thing and I don't, I'm doing it because it's putting a check, giving me a check in my banking account. And, it is what it is. But there's always lessons and there's always learnings and takeaways. So, I did the whole EMT thing, paramedic thing, somewhat out of necessity and a desire not to go to college. I thought it'd be an easy way around it. That was a lesson, not true. But I think one of the things that when I look back on it now is that it taught me how to handle tough situations, and how to have hard conversations, which I still have to be able to do in this job today, right? To do it in a way that was authentic and transparent and respectful of the other individual on the other side of that conversation. That's a transferable skill that you'll need in any job, right? Because it's about people relations, which is going to be inherent to anyone's role, no matter what kind of career path you go on. So, did I know that at the time when I was? No, I did not know that. But when I think back on it now, I'm like, that was the lesson. That was one of many lessons, but a big one that informs who I am today and how I show up at work.
Yeah. And I want to double down that sometimes in your life experience, a job is just going to be a job for you. Like you said, it's just there to put money in the account so that you can live. And it's a stepping stone, ideally, to the next thing that you want to do. And that's okay. But it's about recognizing it and thinking about what am I going to learn and what can I take away from this experience. If you're in the service industry, I think you and I are both big proponents that coming from that industry and any level of experience and learning
Yeah.
how to handle tough customers is a great thing that you can take forever along with you. And so, no matter where you are in your journey, to Ryan's point, there are lessons that will be learned that you can take away right now. Some may take years to look back on in reflection,
Mhm.
but never look at yourself as stuck. Always look at yourselves as what is the opportunity in front of me, or what are the lessons that I can take away, even if I'm not necessarily where I want to be right at this moment.
Yeah. I mean, I go back to my dad. My dad was a barber his whole career, out of necessity, because he went, he was drafted into Vietnam and then released early to take care of my grandfather. And, but my dad, up in high school, straight A student, could have done anything. Brilliant guy, but was a barber for 50 years. And, two things he showed me was, do your best and make the most out of every day and have fun. And you're only as good as your word. So if you make a commitment, whether that's I'll show up at Thursday to give you a haircut or et cetera, keep your word because that is your integrity and that creates trust and that creates depth of relationships and relationships that will follow you over time. And that was one of the most important lessons that he taught me. And I carry that with me every day.
That you do. I know that about you, and I think that's another thing for people to think about is when we make commitments, in this life, it's important to follow through. It's so easy, I think, with our access to technology and how easy it is to communicate with people to bail last minute or things of that nature. But I really think it's important to make sure that if you make those commitments to follow through on them, but also you never know what's going to happen when you do follow through, right? You may meet somebody who can change the entire trajectory of your life driving on the way there.
Sometimes the lesson is I'll never do that again. Right?
Indeed, indeed.
Case, right? You know, that helps bring clarity into life as well.
Yes, I have a few of those from my life experience as well, as I think we all do, which is quite fun. So, hey, one of the things, Ryan, I think is that I wanted to talk about because I think it's on everybody's mind and it's being talked about, in every capacity is AI, and kind of the AI revolution that we're all going through.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious as you think about your own personal experience in adopting and looking at AI, and particularly let's always think about the youth and what they can pull away from it. We're all learning again, right? It's an even playing field, and we're all kind of growing and learning around data science, data, what AI is, what it's becoming. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, just knowing that you come from industry experience, like I talked about in the nonprofit and higher ed sector. You've been in tech sales. You're the CRO here at High Tide Consulting now. How has that kind of ebbed or molded or changed your perspective? And I'm curious how you're looking at AI into the future? And I know that's a very open-ended, wide question to answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think multifold, right? One is, I'm 50 years old, and when it all started coming out, I'm like, man, I got to learn something else, right? There was that whole reaction. Then I have my teenagers who are super anti AI because they're thinking about the environmental impact and data centers and what generative AI is doing to art and music. And they're on me about the negative sides of it, right? Because they're young and focused on kind of the idealistic but not irrelevant, very real impacts that AI is having on our society, which keeps me honest in a different way. Um, but I think the other lens to that is I have seen the power of what AI can do when it's applied correctly to meet the needs of business problems and meet the challenges of nonprofits or higher ed institutions. And one thing that I've always been involved with, and for the most part, is working with organizations that have had to do more with less. And this is what I talk to my kids about the positive sides of AI, right? Which is, you know, that I believe that AI is going to be leveraged in a whole variety of ways. There's going to be some bad things. There's going to be a lot of good things. I don't think it is built to replace humans. I do think that it is, when leveraged correctly, will amplify an organization's ability to do more and have more impact and do better storytelling, and be able to, communicate to their funders where the real needs are and where the investment needs to be. And I think it's really interesting that this is all kind of emerging at a time where the nonprofit industry in particular is under attack. The funding is being cut across the board for a variety of reasons. Our government is cutting funding that supports the socioeconomically challenged folks in our community, whether it be cuts to healthcare or education, um, et cetera, et cetera. And almost every nonprofit that I'm talking to is trying to figure out how to navigate that practical reality. And at the same time, coming to organizations like ours and saying, "Hey, listen, I don't have the money to spend hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to bring AI into my business. So, I find it very incumbent on us being me and you and the High Tide team, to be really focused in on being educators and enablers, to be able to help organizations understand how to leverage this technology in an affordable, thoughtful way that would help them do more, right? And have more impact without necessarily costing anyone a job, but maybe replacing some functionality that is not being managed because you had to lay people off a year ago. It's a really challenging but interesting conversation to be in because it's multifaceted. But I do see the light and I do see the utility, and I am thoughtful about and excited about being able to help organizations leverage this functionality because I do think they'll be able to do more. And I think that it will unlock um, nonprofit professionals' ability to be more focused on the mission. And I go back to my challenges, right? When
Mhm.
I was at Goodwill, which was, getting pulled away from being in front of the house and working with people and spending all day long writing reports. That became a functional reality, right?
Right.
To keep the money coming in. You got to keep, writing those grant reports. But if you can use technology and AI to, generate those reports based off of outcomes that are being captured in real time through Salesforce or whatever technology you use, what does that mean for that professional that can then get back out into the world, right? And I think nonprofits have been so stuck having to leverage the limitations of the technology that they have that it's almost like they've got to reimagine what their careers could look like. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a great thing, but it's a scary thing and it's a change management thing. But that's our responsibility to bring that message forward and to help organizations internalize how they can take advantage of what's happening right now.
I love that you said when AI is done correct. I think it's really refreshing to hear that you have kind of in the ear when you're outside of work the ethical responsibilities of high tide, or not high tide, sorry, of AI, and making sure that those are being done or at least considered as you think about the thoughtful way you in which you make recommendations. And I think of AI as really the great equalizer for nonprofits who have to your talk track have been historically held back. They've been challenged by lower budgets, constraints around how much budget they can put around infrastructure and their ability to complete their mission. And so I feel very excited for both the nonprofit and education sector too that we play in, and what they can do with this technology to allow them to do more. I think to your point, there are in the commercial space there is a very big narrative of how do you use AI to replace humans. I think in our sectors we're thinking about you have these incredibly smart people working at these organizations, and we think that there's an opportunity that they can do more by leveraging AI, to your point, to alleviate a lot of the historically manual parts that they weren't able to invest in. Um,
Yep.
I think if you could
I
put, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
was going to add one thing,
Yeah.
Josh, to that, which is going back to the young folks, which is, you know, there's AI is not going away. It's only going to continue to grow. And one of the things that I keep talking to my kids about, who are 15 and 21, is, you know, please incorporate it into your thinking, whatever your career path is, right? Obviously, don't use it to cheat on your exam or your papers, and they all have policies there in place to protect the integrity of our high school work. But when you're thinking about the career path that you want to pursue, you need to start thinking about the role that AI is going to play in that sector and potentially what your career is going to be. And you need to start internalizing it and being able to incorporate it into your thinking. That's the message, right? Which is it's an add to the way we've done business, the way that we've thought about roles and responsibilities and career paths. If I was in high school or early in my college career, I would be excited about it. But I would not ignore it because it absolutely is going to be critical for you to be competitive in the job.
Completely agree with you. And I would like to turn this into a call to action, which I did on the last podcast, which I think you and I would both recommend the youth should seriously take into consideration working at a nonprofit in the early stages or in any portion of your career. I think there's a couple of reasons why. You get to wear more hats at a nonprofit, right? You get more exposure to different things. So if you are an avid learner and you want to learn around the inner workings, but have everything tie back to an ethical or a mission based position, I highly recommend. You and I have both worked in nonprofits, and I think that that's something for the youth that I think that it wasn't something that was ever presented to me as a real consideration in my career. It was always thinking about being in the commercial space. So, would you agree in calling to our youth here that let's consider working in nonprofits? There's a ton of opportunity. You and I both know that they are adopting AI and thinking about how they can do more towards their mission. And I think that's an interesting intersection for the youth who are maybe having some very reasonable constraints or worries about getting in, and the data concerns and things around with AI is there are spaces where you can find this intersection to be on the forefront of where technology is going, but still
Mhm.
be mission driven and mission focused. And I think
Absolutely. No, I couldn't underscore that message more. And I think even more, I would add another layer to that, Josh, which is I think that we can live very insular lives. We live in our neighborhood, we've got our families, we're from a demographic of folks, it might be an ethnicity, it might be a religious belief, it might be sexual orientation or, political affiliation. It might be a combination, oftentimes is a combination of those things. But what volunteering or working in a nonprofit does is it forces you out of your bubble, right? And it gets you into helping folks that might be from a different demographic that you're part of, or helping folks that live in poverty, right? I grew up, poor, but we grew up in the suburbs, right? I had never been into a project before until, I started working at Cal State East Bay. Well, actually, when I was an EMT paramedic, but different, right? Um, but understanding that it's a big world out there and there's a whole lot of folks, and not everybody has it as hard as you or as easy as you. Um, it creates a level of empathy for the world and for other humans that I think gives you a world perspective that helps you in life. Not only be a more well rounded human being, but I think no matter what you do, even if you end up in tech, if you have empathy and understanding and a worldview, I think that that makes you a much more authentic person and also helps you put energy in the right place in your life.
so well said there, Ryan. So well said. I think being of service does something for you internally that you, until you experience it, you don't really know that. I have to describe it. It's kind of a cheat code to feeling good because there's something inherently great that happens when you are being of service to people who need it and you are leading with action. I think I'm a big proponent of volunteering your time. It's one thing to give money, it's another thing to give time and get your hands on the mission in whatever capacity that may be. And look, I'll tell you something about my own personal journey with my mother. I think you know this story, which is, um, we didn't grow up with a lot, me and my mother, in kind of my childhood. But she always made sure that I was aware of others who had so much less. And so it was like every third Friday, I think we had to go work at the soup kitchen. And my mom didn't let me like clean the tables or work in the back. She said, like, you're on the front line giving food, and you need to look these people in the eye who all they need is food. All they care about is just where's their next meal going to come from. And as a little kid, right, it's so hard. You always think about the things you don't have. You want the Nintendo 64, whatever the game console may have been at the time. But I think there's something so valuable into your call to action, which is it's not just about you don't have to take a career there, but volunteer and be of service and get out of your bubble and see what it's like to truly give your time. I think that that's something that you and I both think is so valuable, and I think we commend people who do that. And especially when you're young, it'll just change your future.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I can't underscore that enough. And, volunteer where your passion lies, or volunteer where you're going to be totally uncomfortable, right? One of the things that I loved about my first couple of weeks when I worked at Salesforce was that we had mandatory volunteering. And I don't know if you ever saw that movie with Will Smith, The Pursuit of Happiness, where he is homeless, and it's a true story based off of a person from San Francisco. But when he is homeless and he stays in the shelter, and then in the food kitchen, that's Glide Memorial here in San Francisco. And I interacted with them quite a bit when I worked at Goodwill, because our we serve the same community, right? And Amazingly deeply inspirational organization that I've had multiple touch points with over my life. But one of the things that I really loved was that the first day of working at Salesforce, they put us on a bus and they drove us over there. And I remember there being a whole bunch of like executives, some of them from Europe, that were in like really expensive suits. And of course, this was my backyard, so I was used to it. Uh, but we went down to the soup kitchen and they're in their fancy suits, getting aprons on and having to stir big vats of soup
I
and
love it.
getting like chicken bouillon on their pants and stuff like that and freaking out. And I was like, holy crap, these are like 45-year-old people that have never done this.
Right.
I don't know if they were enjoying it. It sure didn't look like it, but I think it was important for them to understand, um, that Salesforce was very much committed to the nonprofit community, and that was part of the company they were going to work for. But did I enjoy their awkwardness throughout that afternoon? I absolutely did. And hopefully they'll all have a lesson around giving back. But we also served about 250 people meals that day
Yeah.
that didn't have one.
There was something so beautiful about that time when Salesforce spun up the foundation, which then became the .org side of it. I think that there's a heartbeat still in this space that truly believes and cares that there is a positive intersection of technology and mission driven work, and it's still out there, and I think there's a lot of us who are still holding on to that version of what the reason why it spawned and what it was about, and more than just the work that was done and the technology that's being implemented, but the missions that are being impacted. And so one of the things, Ryan, obviously you were around during those days and have seen a lot of that. Could you maybe speak towards the vibration of what you guys were doing, and that how the work was always around the impact and the success story, the final edge? Like, help us uncover what it was like to be in the office and be a part of that vibration at that time.
Uh, yeah, I think that, at that in those early days, at the foundation, the remit was for me, I did have a quota, right? There was a dollar amount of licenses that I needed to sell, but the focus and the message from leadership was it's critically important for us to educate nonprofits and put this technology in their hands and help them understand how they can utilize it. And then let's see what the impact is. Let's measure that impact. Let's double down on that impact. So, yes, I did have a quota, but it was really about being an educator. Right. And then also like walking hand in hand with nonprofits that were trying to figure out how to implement the system. What we saw was the emergence of a community in within the nonprofits of thought leadership, of sharing and collaboration, and the emergence of apps on the App Exchange that nonprofits were making, or that partners were making for free and deploying unmanaged packages onto the App Exchange that extended at the time pretty limited functionality on NPSB to do a whole lot more. Like Volunteers for Salesforce was an app that a guy named David Habib built. I think he ended up selling it to Salesforce for $1 because it was a spirit of philanthropy and giving and doing more and having more impact. And being part of that was really, really special, at the, best technology company in the world, actually putting their money where their mouth was. So that was fantastic.
I just love to ask about it because I think it's such a special time. And it's something pretty incredible what Salesforce did and continues to do for nonprofits by giving them an entry point into utilizing technology so they can further their mission. So thank you for speaking about that, because I think it's so important to remember, why Salesforce started this and what the reason was, and what they were trying to do to create tangible impact in a
Yep.
space they care about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
It's why I
what
came, why I'm still around.
There you go. That was my question is what keeps you staying around in the space, Ryan, is you've worked at Salesforce, you worked for Slalom and another really great organization called Arcus, who's a consulting partner in the space before joining us over here at High Tide. Help us understand a little bit more around where your career went post Salesforce and how you kind of navigated the changes or moving outside of Salesforce.
Yeah, when I was at Salesforce as an account executive, I loved the role. But what I realized early was that my particular role, which was an account executive, I was getting a lot of value in bringing my industry subject matter expertise and building relationships with leaders and playing a role in introducing the technology and understanding what the use cases were and applicability was, whether it was fundraising or programs or volunteering or marketing. But I always had to go get help, to explain how something would be leveraged, whether it was through my solution engineer, which at the time was a guy named John Patton, who I now work with here at High Tide. Um, and I was just intellectually curious and somewhat unsatisfied with the fact that I could only answer about 20% of the questions that might come up on any given call. And
Interesting.
so I, they didn't have Trailhead back then. They had help and training and they had videos. And I started to study to see if I could maybe get a Salesforce administrator, which I was not encouraged to do. I wasn't not encouraged to do it, but nobody said go get deeper level of knowledge. And I just wanted to understand how do you actually take requirements, design a solution, and then deliver a solution. And so that ultimately started getting me thinking about more of the solution engineering and delivery side of things. And at the time, I had built some great relationships with a couple of our current competitors, Arcus and Cloud for Good, and got to know them pretty well and started to understand the different kinds of methodologies that could be leveraged to implement solutions, agile and waterfall, and a combination of both. And, you know, understood that the real impact was happening kind of on the implementation side of things and the delivery and the enablement side of things. And so that led me to professional services and had a great career at Arcus, and wonderful year working at Slalom and learned a lot about a variety of different kinds of enterprise needs and small organizational needs. And, through that trajectory, probably did 1,000 different projects, um, if not more, and really built a deep repository of knowledge around how to apply. Slalom brought me into some other technologies outside of Salesforce, so which was great. And then when I met you and learned about High Tide, it brought me back to being focused on impact and being focused on return on investment and being educators. So, coming to High Tide in February, it almost like feels like I'm bringing my career full circle because I'm back into having this very kind of authentic um, conversation, both with you and with our prospects and our clients around how do we think about technology today? How do we think about Salesforce? How do we think about agentic? How do we think about, we've got some ServiceNow customers and leveraging that to have the most impact with the highest return on investment that our clients can measure. And then being with them along the way to report on that impact, that level of accountability, committing up front, delivering together, measuring success, and holding each other accountable is the world that I want to be in, right? Because you can do technology sales and sell solutions and sell products and walk away from it and not hold yourself accountable to whether or not that was a successful project or a good purchase. And that's not the world that I ever want to be a part of. None of this work is ever easy, but if you do it right and you do it with integrity, that's how you have a career that is successful and one that brings deep meaning.
Well, our listeners are probably realizing now why we are so grateful and fortunate that you have joined High Tide and brought this wealth of knowledge and industry expertise and are really shaping the future of where we're going. In the last couple of minutes here, Ryan, there's one question that I always like to ask people, and I think it's a great one to end on because we've spent so much time thinking about your career, mindset, how you've overcome certain things, taken non-traditional routes, and still been able to become the chief revenue officer of a really great organization. My final question for you today is, what are two things that you wish you could tell your former self? I think that's something that's so interesting. I love to hear about it from our guests on here because I think it gives them an opportunity to really look back and think about, man, I wish I could have told myself this. And what I ultimately am hoping is one day we have hundreds of these are the things I wish I could have told my younger self, and we can hand that over to the youth as a mini blueprint. But for you, what would two things be that you wish you could tell a younger Ryan?
Well, the one that came immediately to the top of my mind is don't pigeonhole yourself, right? And I think that's been a theme throughout this conversation today. But, there was a time where I wanted to move on from higher ed and student affairs and find a different career. And um, instead of giving myself a little bit of grace, I was like just throwing resumes out to everybody. And maybe because I didn't think that I could pivot into something different. And I was just like, I need to find something to get out and get into a different kind of. I think I was even interviewing with like copy machine, like Xerox, like sales jobs and stuff. Not that that's bad, but ultimately it was not going to take me in the direction that I wanted to go for my career. So I think it's just, you know, don't pigeonhole yourself. Don't get caught up in, any kind of internal dialogue that limits yourself. Because if you have a positive mindset and you believe in yourself, and sometimes you need to get help, and sometimes you need someone else to say that to you. And maybe that's the second part of this. Um, you know, take advice, um, get help. If somebody gives you a compliment, take it, right? You don't have to get your peacock feathers up and get caught up in your own ego. But don't pigeonhole yourself and allow yourself to grow. And I'd say probably that's my second one, which is be aware of your ego. Um, be very aware of your ego and when it gets in the way of your own growth.
Mm,
Somebody's going to say something to you that you don't like. Somebody might say something that to you that might make you feel embarrassed in front of other people. And you can get very caught up in the emotions that are tied to that. And it actually gets in the way from maybe the lesson, right? And
mm,
you know, um, when I was at Arcus, I was kind of a new manager of sales folks and doing my best to figure it out. And I wanted to get it right, and I wanted to show up right. And the reality is that I've got a really great skill set, but I am not. It's not. I need help. I'm not always right. I make mistakes. I'm not a type A person that's super granular and detailed. And my colleague over there, Kate Reynolds, um, who was hired as a salesperson and then, became our VP of sales, had a very complementary skill set, um, very much different than mine, and was not afraid to tell me when I was doing something wrong. And I remember the first time that she did it, I was like, WTH. Probably not even that. I was like, I'm getting called out here, and I got embarrassed and my feelings were hurt. But what I realized is that Kate cared and wanted to help me become a better leader and was giving me that feedback uh, in order to do so. And, I really recommend that because that once you allow your ego to get out of the way and you allow folks to be able to give you feedback and say the hard things to you, and realize that 9 times out of 10, it's to help, you will grow at a much faster rate than you will when you are unwilling to hear things that might be critical and or things that might be challenge your assumptions.
mm. So well said, Ryan. And I love that you tied it back to the one of the beginning points you made around always finding the lesson, even if you're not on the path that you think that you were going to be on. So I think that that's incredible advice. A book that I would recommend if you want to take a tangible next step from Ryan's advice. Holiday has a book called Ego is the Enemy. It's a great way to just think about how to identify when the ego is popping up and when we need to take over the driver's seat, put the ego in the passenger seat along with us. But Ryan, so well said and so beautifully said in terms of we never want to get in the way of the lessons that life or our work could be teaching us because those become the skills of the next versions of us. So, Brian, thank you so much for the time, the energy, all of the thought leadership. Obviously, it's incredible to be your friend and business partner. And thank you for your time. This has been great.
Was. Yeah, thanks, Josh. This was fun.